Ferrari's entire customer model just ran into a structural wall, and it wasn't caused by a failure on track. By deploying a shadow simulator operation with Haas, Toyota has exposed Ferrari's biggest hidden weakness, their financial dependency on customer hardware sales, and the FIA is completely paralyzed to stop it. For years, Maranello relied on a lucrative dynamic: build expensive gearboxes and suspensions, sell them to Haas, and keep their customer team permanently trapped in the midfield. But that leash has just been shattered. It was the perfect corporate hierarchy. Ferrari holds the leash, and Haas stays exactly where they belong, heavily reliant, functionally dependent, and locked in the midfield. But Toyota just severed that leash, and they did it using a regulatory blind spot so massive, the FIA is completely paralyzed to stop it. If you want to understand how modern Formula One is really won behind closed doors, hit subscribe, because the era of the traditional customer team is dead. Formula One's financial regulations are violently strict when it comes to infrastructure. If a team wants to upgrade their multi-million-dollar driver-in-the-loop simulator, every single wire, actuator, and line of code must be declared. It eats into their capital expenditure, CapEx, limits. It restricts their car development. It forces brutal compromises between upgrading physical hardware and developing on-track aerodynamic packages. Toyota, however, is not a Formula One constructor. They are an independent corporate giant with a colossal World Endurance Championship program, an active rally division, and a completely unrestricted global R&D budget. This is where the regulatory heist happens. The CapEx trap and F1's financial prison. To understand the sheer magnitude of Toyota's play, you have to understand the financial prison that the FIA has constructed around modern Formula One teams. The cost cap is not just a limit on how much carbon fiber you can lay up in a season. It dictates the fundamental infrastructure of the sport. The FIA aggressively monitors listed parts versus non-listed parts, but they also police the very facilities used to design those parts. If Ferrari wants to build a new simulation rig, they have to sacrifice critical development budget. Simulators are no longer just video games. They are highly complex motion platforms, requiring hyper-accurate multi-body dynamic software. They require constant calibration, immense computational server farms, and armies of software engineers to ensure that a digital bump on a digital curb behaves exactly like a real one in Miami or Silverstone. For years, Haas lacked this correlation. They were completely blind in the digital realm. They survived by essentially buying Ferrari's homework, because they could not independently test mechanical components in a high-fidelity virtual environment. They were forced to buy Ferrari's expensive inboard suspension and gearbox architecture. They had no choice. You cannot build a custom suspension system if you cannot simulate its kinetic behavior before manufacturing. Ferrari knew this, which is why Haas remained the ultimate subordinate customer team. But by partnering with Haas and stepping in as a title sponsor to create the TGR Haas F1 team for 2026, Toyota isn't just slapping a decal on the rear wing. They are granting Haas unrestricted access to a phantom testing facility and establishing a pipeline of engineers and resources that completely sidesteps the FIA's infrastructural strangulation. The phantom simulator and the pipeline exploit. Under current FIA regulations, a team cannot spend outside the cap to build a bespoke F1 simulator. But there is absolutely no rule preventing a team's drivers and engineers from utilizing a commercial facility owned by a separate corporate entity under the guise of driver familiarization, human resource development, or commercial partnership duties. Toyota has explicitly marketed this partnership around three pillars: people, product, pipeline. That word, pipeline, is the smoking gun. Toyota Gazoo Racing possesses some of the most advanced simulation architecture on the planet. They have developed this infrastructure outside of F1's jurisdiction, funding it through their WEC hypercar budgets and road car technology divisions. By installing a state-of-the-art simulator at Haas's Banbury facility, Toyota is effectively gifting an F1 team a piece of bleeding-edge hardware that would normally shatter a midfield team's CapEx allowance. But the real magic happens off the books. The FIA cannot legally audit the entirety of Toyota Motor Corporation. They cannot police the back-end server farms in Cologne or Japan, where Toyota engineers run advanced multi-body dynamic algorithms. When a Haas driver sits in the new Banbury simulator, the mathematical correlation powering that rig is being refined by Toyota's unrestricted global workforce. Ferrari sacrifices millions to keep their simulator state-of-the-art. Haas just got handed the keys to a bleeding-edge Toyota computational network for exactly $0 against the FIA's developmental cost cap. The human USB drive strategy. The brilliance of this partnership lies in the integration of personnel. Toyota is sending its own engineers, mechanics, and junior drivers into the Haas garage. On paper, this is a beautiful initiative to train the next generation of Japanese motorsport talent. In reality, it is a devastatingly effective data bridge. Data transfer in Formula One is heavily monitored. If you send a terabyte of aerodynamic blueprints from a factory to an off-site server, the FIA's digital auditors will flag it. But you cannot audit a human brain. You cannot place a cost cap on the knowledge an engineer absorbs while standing in the Haas garage during free practice 2. These embedded Toyota engineers act as human USB drives. They analyze Haas's real-world telemetry. They observe how the Pirelli tires interact with the track surface. And they take that conceptual knowledge straight back to Toyota Gazoo Racing. Once inside Toyota's ecosystem, away from the prying eyes of F1's financial regulators, that data can be theoretically used to calibrate Toyota's own commercial simulation tools. When those same engineers return to Haas, they aren't bringing illegal blueprints. They are bringing perfectly optimized setups, refined correlation methods, and a deeper understanding of vehicle dynamics. They are bringing pre-solved mathematical equations. The pipeline is flawless. Toyota's engineers run the numbers in a facility the FIA legally cannot audit, and Haas suddenly shows up to a race weekend with a baseline setup that mathematically rivals the factory Ferrari. The mathematical warfare of setup correlation. To truly grasp the devastation Toyota is unleashing on the grid, you have to look at the exact science of setup correlation. For the past decade, Formula One has been fighting an invisible war between the wind tunnel, the simulator, and the actual asphalt. When a team designs a front wing, they test it in computational fluid dynamics, CFD. Then, they put a 60% scale model in a wind tunnel. But wind tunnels are static. They do not replicate the violent, unpredictable reality of a car bouncing over a curb at 280 kilometers per hour. That is what the driver-in-the-loop simulator is for. A high-tier F1 simulator uses a massive hexapod motion platform, wrapping the driver in a 360-degree visual environment. But the hardware is just the shell. The real magic is the tire model. Pirelli supplies basic tire data, but every team has to write their own proprietary thermal and degradation algorithms to predict how the rubber will behave under extreme load. Historically, Haas has been notorious for struggling with tire degradation. They would qualify brilliantly, only to watch their tires disintegrate during the race. This was a direct result of poor simulator correlation. Their virtual car was not destroying its virtual tires, so the engineers kept sending the drivers out with aggressive suspension geometries. Ferrari couldn't help them. Ferrari's simulator is strictly optimized for the Ferrari chassis, the Ferrari aerodynamic map, and the Ferrari weight distribution. Buying parts from Maranello didn't fix the problem. It just meant Haas was blindly bolting Ferrari hardware onto a car with completely different aerodynamic characteristics. Toyota's intervention changes this mathematics entirely. Toyota has spent the last decade mastering tire degradation in the World Endurance Championship. In WEC, managing tire temperatures across multi-hour stints is the sole difference between winning Le Mans and retiring in the pits. Toyota possesses a library of thermodynamic algorithms that rivals anything currently sitting in Maranello. By integrating Toyota's back-end software processing with the newly installed Banbury simulator, Haas instantly inherits over a decade of hyper-advanced endurance tire modeling. The Phantom testing facility isn't just generating aerodynamic data, it is curing the fundamental curse of the Haas chassis. The days of Haas destroying their rear tires on lap 12 are over, exploiting the aerodynamic testing restrictions, ATR. But the simulator trick goes even deeper when you factor in the FIA's aerodynamic testing restrictions, or the ATR. The ATR is a sliding scale designed to punish success. If you win the Constructors' Championship, you get the least amount of wind tunnel and CFD time. If you finish last, you get the most. Haas, historically bouncing around the bottom of the standings, receives a generous allocation of testing time. Ferrari, usually fighting at the sharp end of the grid, is heavily restricted. Under the old customer dynamic, Ferrari benefited from Haas running their own tests. Haas would test a concept, and while they couldn't directly share the CAD files, the broad conceptual direction was always visible to the paddock, and specifically to Maranello. Toyota has hijacked this ATR advantage. Because Toyota Gazoo Racing is heavily involved in the aerodynamic development of the Haas vehicle, they get to directly observe how Haas utilizes its massive allowance of CFD and wind tunnel runs. Toyota engineers are participating in the design and manufacture of carbon fiber parts in simulated extreme operational environments. This means Toyota is functionally gaining an F1-level aerodynamic education without ever formally entering the sport. They are using Haas's ATR allowance to train their own aerodynamicists in ground effect physics. And because they are using this data to upgrade the Banbury simulator, the feedback loop is entirely closed off from Ferrari. Ferrari is locked in a desperate battle with McLaren and Red Bull, rationing every single hour of their wind tunnel time. Meanwhile, their own engine customer is rapidly accelerating away from them, powered by an unrestricted Japanese workforce that is analyzing every megabyte of data Haas produces. The collapse of the Maranello dependency. This isn't just about saving money. This is about exposing Ferrari's fatal structural weakness and dismantling a monopoly. Ferrari's entire customer revenue model relies on Haas being dependent on them for structural IP. Because Haas historically lacked the simulation power to build their own mechanical components, they bought whatever Ferrari sold them. But Toyota just destroyed that dependency. With Toyota's unrestricted simulation power validating their data, Haas can now rapidly prototype, test, and correlate their own bespoke mechanical parts in a virtual environment before a single piece of expensive carbon fiber or titanium is ever manufactured. They no longer have to blindly trust that Ferrari's pull rod or push rod suspension geometry will magically suit the Haas aerodynamic platform. They can simulate it themselves. If Haas discovers through Toyota's simulation pipeline that a custom suspension geometry yields better airflow conditioning than the stock Ferrari unit, they now have the confidence and the digital proof to manufacture it independently. They can slowly start rejecting Ferrari's non-listed parts, starving Maranello of that crucial customer revenue, while simultaneously stripping Ferrari of their secondary on-track data source. Maranello is watching their own customer team evolve into a shadow works operation overnight. Fred Vasseur knows exactly what is happening. The telemetry doesn't lie. Haas is arriving at circuits with a level of setup correlation that normally requires a $100 million factory infrastructure. They are punching violently above their weight class, extracting maximum performance out of the VF series chassis by exploiting a simulation loop that Ferrari cannot match without burning through their restrictive budget cap. The perfect corporate Trojan horse. The psychological misdirection here is absolute genius. Toyota isn't entering Formula One as a constructor, which means they bypass the massive FIA entry fees and the intense scrutiny of building an engine from scratch. They are simply a technical partner and a title sponsor. They get all the branding, all the global exposure, and all the engineering data of an F1 operation without carrying any of the regulatory risk. Ferrari thought they were securing a loyal customer team through 2028. They thought they were selling engines and gearboxes to a helpless, perpetually struggling American outfit. Instead, they just funded the Trojan horse that Toyota is using to quietly conquer the midfield. By supplying Haas with power units, Ferrari is functionally acting as the engine supplier for Toyota's shadow R&D program. Every time the Ferrari V6 hybrid engine fires up in the back of the Haas, it generates telemetry that Toyota's engineers get to study. Ferrari is powering the very vehicle that is undermining their financial and political dominance. The inevitable engine divorce. Every team principal in the pit lane is looking at the 2028 expiration date of the Haas-Ferrari engine contract and realizing the terrifying truth. This technical partnership is not a permanent alliance. It is a transition phase. By 2026, Formula One transitions to a radically new set of power unit regulations, emphasizing hybrid components and relying entirely on sustainable fuels. Ferrari is currently pouring tens of millions into developing this new V6 hybrid. Haas will bolt this new Ferrari engine into the back of the TGR Haas F1 car. But Toyota is already heavily invested in advanced hybrid technology and hydrogen combustion engines in their broader motorsport portfolio. While Ferrari uses Haas to validate the 2026 power unit, Toyota's embedded engineers will be quietly monitoring the telemetry. They will see exactly how the Ferrari hybrid deployment system operates. They will analyze the thermal efficiency of the MGUK and the battery recovery rates. Ferrari is inadvertently giving Toyota a front-row seat to the pinnacle of hybrid engine architecture. Once Toyota has mapped out the intricacies of F1's hybrid demands, And once Haas has established total independence through their bespoke simulation network, the final cord will be cut. Haas will no longer need Ferrari's gearbox, they will no longer need Ferrari's suspension, and eventually, they will not need Ferrari's engine. The Trojan horse will open, and a full factory works operation will step out. The regulatory panic in Paris. The fallout from this loophole is currently sending shockwaves through the FIA headquarters in Paris. The governing body has spent the last 5 years desperately trying to close loopholes. They banned Mercedes' dual-axis steering, DAS. They restricted Aston Martin's aggressive rear-wing designs. They aggressively audit catering budgets and travel expenses to ensure nobody breaches the cost cap. But they have absolutely no framework to police a decentralized corporate takeover. How do you write a regulation that prevents a mechanic from learning something? How do you penalize a team because a third-party sponsor happens to own a massive supercomputer in another country? You can't. If the FIA attempts to block Toyota engineers from accessing Haas data, they violate the very premise of commercial sponsorship and technical partnerships that keep the sport financially afloat. If they try to audit Toyota Gazoo Racing, Toyota's corporate lawyers will simply shut the door, pointing out that TGR is not an official entrant in the Formula One World Championship. The FIA's jurisdiction ends at the perimeter fence of the Haas factory. Anything that happens outside that fence is a regulatory wasteland, the death of the midfield. This is the grim reality facing the rest of the grid. Teams like Williams and Alpine are operating within the strict confines of the cost cap, desperately trying to balance their budgets while upgrading outdated infrastructure. They are playing the game exactly as the FIA intended. Haas and Toyota are playing an entirely different sport. They have recognized that the cost cap is only a barrier if you actually abide by its structural intent. By offloading the most expensive, capex-heavy infrastructure, the simulation network and the personnel training, onto an unregulated parent entity, they have artificially expanded their budget cap by tens of millions of dollars. Ferrari exposed their neck by treating Haas purely as a revenue stream and a political pawn. They underestimated the ambition of their American customer, and they failed to see the Japanese giant waiting in the shadows. The simulator trick is just the beginning. The pipeline is open, the data is flowing, and the FIA is utterly powerless to turn off the tap. The midfield is about to become a slaughterhouse, and Ferrari has inadvertently handed the executioner the axe.